We are down to the last couple weeks before the 2020 NFL draft. The NFL knows how desperate we all are for some sports right now and refused to delay the draft. This means we're going to get the very first virtual presentation of the NFL draft. That means NFL owners, GMs, and coaches are not allowed to be at their facilities and will be stuck at their home office, relying on Zoom and phone calls to get things done. These 58 players will be participating in this virtual event, and I'm just really interested in seeing how this all goes down. This could either be the best thing the NFL has ever done or the worst thing. Relying on technology to do something like host a war room for the NFL draft is going to have its glitches and hiccups. But as long as the Broncos aren't out here trying to use a fax machine to send in their picks, I don't know why we can't just use a regular old phone call to call in the picks as they're made so that there's no delays if somebody's Wi-Fi goes out. John Harbaugh actually even brought up a concern over the Zoom meeting being hacked by, check this, other NFL teams. Not even just random people out hacking people on the reg. They're worried about NFL teams breaking in. I think it's safe to say that Bill Belichick has made everybody paranoid now. But hopefully if something does go tragically wrong, it will be at least entertaining for all of us watching at home. But with this unique approach to the NFL draft, I believe that it's going to discourage teams from trading as much as we've become accustomed to. So this mock draft will have no trades. But this mock draft was brought to you by the number 4. So today I'm bringing my longest mock draft ever with 4 rounds. Without trades, the first 3 picks in this draft are pretty easy to project based on needs and positional value. The Bengals get the LSU Tiger King himself, and the Redskins get a generational talent at the second most important position in football. The Lions taking Jeffrey Okudah over Isaiah Simmons is the one that I'm still on the fence about, but off-ball linebackers just aren't valued as much as cornerbacks, even though I think that Simmons is also a generational defender. But I didn't want to waste too much time on those first 3 picks, and I do hope that you will help me reach the goal of 4,000 likes on this video. I know that is a lot, but to keep up with the 1, 2, 3, 4 theme that I've been doing, we're up in these mock drafts every single time, and I know that we can get there. I greatly appreciate your support growing this channel, and that like goes farther than you know. But if you're truly enjoying this content, make sure you subscribe if you're new to the channel. Let's move on to pick number 4. At number 4, we've got the Giants on the clock, and Dave Gettleman, the GM, is under heavy pressure from ownership to make a pretty quick turnaround this season, and that's going to put pressure on him to find a star that the team can sell as a promising building block for the future. Times are tough in New York right now, and nostalgia is something that will get you back in the good graces with Giants fans. When this Giants team has been great in NFL history and throughout, it's been in large part due to the play from the linebacker position, and Isaiah Simmons I know is not your traditional linebacker, but that's actually a good thing because not only are you tapping into the fields with the nostalgia and drafting a linebacker to build the defense around, you're getting a linebacker made for the future. With the depth at offensive tackle, the Giants can pass on one early on and target a guy in the 2nd round. And I mean, it's not like they've been that great at drafting offensive tackles anyways. At number 5, we've got the Dolphins, and while I still believe that the Dolphins are going to need to trade up to get to a Tagovailoa, in a mock draft with no trades, he falls right into their lap at number 5 every single time. I think this is the best case scenario for both parties, and I will be low-key rooting for this scenario to play out. As I mentioned earlier, we could see a pretty conservative approach from the teams this year. If they decide to play it safe with the lack of preparation from all the social distancing, forcing them to work from home, and limiting their real interaction with prospects during the draft process, the Dolphins could end up being the biggest winners if the teams in the top 4 stay put. I just uploaded a video breaking down the top 10 quarterbacks in this draft that you should check out after this, and I mentioned in that I was worried about Tua's career if he ends up in the wrong situation, and with his injury history, I pretty much want him to just avoid landing with the Chargers because they've got to be cursed or something with how frequently their players seem to get hurt. At number 6, speaking of the California curse to themselves, the Chargers drafting Justin Herbert feels like a home run pick right now, unless they sign Cam Newton. In that case, this pick's got to be an offensive tackle here, and a trade down scenario would be a viable option for them if a team wants to jump the Panthers for Herbert, but I don't see any teams that really want to get that high up in this draft scenario, and it's likely that Jordan Love is the guy that teams outside of the top 5 or 6 picks are going to be targeting if they need a quarterback. Before I move on, I want to take a minute to thank the true sponsor of this mock draft, Manscaped, and their new 3.0 waterproof body trimmer. For those that don't know, Manscaped is the only men's brand that is dedicated to below-the-waist grooming and hygiene. I'm a huge fan of Manscaped and their Perfect Package Essentials Kit, which is the world's first all-in-one manscaping kit that makes manscaping safe and easy. And with their newly released Lawnmower 3.0 waterproof body trimmer, they have really taken this grooming thing to the next level. But today I want to tell you about this other stuff from Manscaped called Crop Preserver. You put deodorant on your armpits, right? So why don't you put deodorant on the smelliest part of your body. And with a lot of us barely leaving the house these days, I think it's okay to admit that most of us have taken fewer showers than usual. The Crop Preserver keeps it fresh for about 24 hours after a shower, and the Reviver does the job when you need it. This lineup of crop care has a really fresh scent, but let's be honest, anything is better than the natural alternative. As a subscriber, you can get 20% off and 2 free gifts added on if you use my promo code NFL20. That's NFL20. Thank you again to Manscaped for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to the mock draft. The Panthers are on the clock at pick number 7, and this no trades mock doesn't present a great situation for the Panthers, but Derrick Brown could be a solid, safe option to fall back on if it plays out like this. I honestly would consider drafting a future replacement for Russell Okung, especially with the offensive lineman being untouched thus far, but I'm not sure if they should give up on Greg Little and some of the other tackle prospects on the team to take over in 2021. But Auburn defensive tackle Derrick Brown bridges the gap for K'Wan Short, who's only got 2 years left on his contract, while providing an extra push in the middle that they've been trying to fill with band-aid options like Dontari Poe and Gerald McCoy in recent years. At pick number 8, the Cardinals are on the clock, and I'm no offensive line expert, so I've typically got to rely on some trustworthy sources to find out who really are the best offensive linemen in each NFL draft. This year, the experts are all over the place as far as a consensus top guy goes, and it really kind of makes my head hurt. I'm thinking that this is because there's so many elite level guys, especially with the increased value of the right tackle in recent years. The Cardinals just happen to need a right tackle, and Tristan Wirfs is a physical specimen at the offensive tackle position. But 10 years ago, guys like Tristan Wirfs and Jedrick Wills would be the top options in the second round, but they'd lose almost a full round's worth of value because of their experience on the right side and their lack thereof on the left side. Well, we are in the age of equality, and offensive linemen are not discriminated for which side of the offensive line they happen to play on, but for the quality of their abilities. At pick number 9, the Jacksonville Jaguars are on the clock, and them trading Nick Foles to the Bears mean that this team is all in on Gardner Minshew. Or are they? Just kidding, I am not trying to sell any Jaguars propaganda here because I think the Jaguars are in an odd position right now as a team, and we'll be using this as a transitional year where guys will be playing for their future with the team. Doug Marrone is one of the leading candidates to be fired going into the season, and if Gardner Minshew fails, then the team is going to be set up to start over at head coach and quarterback in 2021. Either way, if this front office wants to be able to say that they gave Gardner Minshew a real shot, and they've got to upgrade the weapons around him, and Jerry Jeudy could be the best wide receiver on this team upon arrival. I'm actually a big DJ Chark fan, and I think Chris Conley is underrated, but these are still complementary pieces, while Jeudy is a go-to route runner that a guy like Minshew needs for a more consistent and reliable target. You know, somebody that you can really trust on third long to convert the first down. At number 10, the Cleveland Browns are on the clock, and streaming the beginning of the NFL draft in 480p is going to be so much more enjoyable for the Browns front office if all these teams pass on an offensive lineman in the top 10. They are one of the teams that need left tackle way more than a right tackle, and I keep saying that Andrew Thomas is the safe left tackle option, but Mekhi Becton is going to be far too tempting for teams due to that freak of nature athleticism that he brings to the table. But really, the Browns just need blue chip prospects along the offensive line, and they can find a way to build around them later on. Right now, just get some building blocks. At number 11, the Jets are on the clock, and they were also paying close attention to the offensive linemen falling into their lap. But I gotta say, they were probably also surprised to only see one wide receiver taken thus far, and after losing Robbie Anderson to the Panthers, Rashad Perriman was signed as an emergency deep threat. So even though they covered their offensive holes with band-aids, the Jets are going to need to address both positions pretty early in the draft. With one of the elite wide receivers still on the board, I think you've got to go with CeeDee Lamb here because he's going to increase production from your franchise quarterback without Darnold even having to hold on to the ball for very long. Be sure to go check out my video of the top 10 wide receivers in the 2020 NFL Draft for a more in-depth breakdown of CeeDee Lamb and the rest of the guys in which I think is a generational crop of wide receiver talent. It's actually gone on to be my most viewed video ever, so thank you guys so much for your support on that, for liking and commenting and sharing that video. That has been a definite bright spot for me during these dark times we're in right now. At pick number 12, the Raiders are on the clock, and I want to preface this with a comment about my previous mock draft for the Raiders. And I may have jumped the gun when I was talking about Derek Carr in the past tense and Marcus Mariota in the future tense regarding the starting quarterback position. I apologize. Derek Carr will get a chance to redeem himself because he's got all the tools. Maybe that's why they went for the quiet, soft-spoken Mariota as the potential replacement instead of a rah-rah guy like Jameis Winston, who would have had the practice squad eating W's every day and just putting too much pressure on Derek Carr to succeed. The next step to improving the quarterback production is upgrading the weapons. Nelson Aguilar was signed to a 1-year deal by the Raiders. Very similar situation to what the Jets are doing in just trying to add a little bit more speed at the wide receiver position. But I think the arrow is pointing up for Hunter Renfrow, who may actually have a higher ceiling right now when it comes to being a reliable slot wide receiver. The Jets did snipe CeeDee Lamb at the last second, but you know the Raiders, they'll just take the next guy on their draft board anyways, like they did with Colton Miller. And honestly, the consolation prize for them might be a better fit anyways. Henry Ruggs III is a borderline elite option wide receiver in this draft class, and I think that the Broncos are pretty high on him too. So you're not only adding a deep speed threat that you desperately need opposite of the slower possession guys that litter this Raiders depth chart, but you're potentially sniping a prospect 3 picks ahead of your division rival Broncos. So that's addition by subtraction right there. And if Henry Ruggs makes it to the Raiders, Nelson Aguilar's roster spot isn't even guaranteed. At pick number 13, I've got the 49ers on the clock after they traded DeForest Buckner to the Colts for this pick. I'm still pretty shocked to see them make that move. It's been one of the more bold moves that we've seen, I think, in recent years, and not because the compensation wasn't fair, but because it was done with the pick locked in at pick number 13. Usually these kind of trades are done preseason or before the trade deadline, but the 49ers are taking a stab at addressing a need 13 picks into the draft, and they're putting up an elite defensive tackle as collateral. There's a chance that the top 3 to 5 guys on their draft board are completely gone by the time they even get on the clock. And in this scenario, the top wide receivers are already gone, leaving them to address what I think is their next biggest need, offensive line. You might argue and say cornerback, but this draft is just too deep to be spending a top 15 pick on anybody not named Jeffrey Okudah. But along the offensive line for the 49ers, they released Mike Person in what was a kind of surprising move for me, and it opens up a hole at guard. And before that, I would have thought that they would want an offensive tackle successor for Joe Staley and essentially do what the Eagles did last year with Jason Peters and Andre Dillard. And like I said, I'm no offensive line expert, but what if you moved a guy like Andrew Thomas or Jedrick Wills to guard for a season or two and allowed Joe Staley to play out the contract that he's under right now? Wills is probably better suited for the move inside while also maintaining the same potential to play left tackle one day. Moving him to left guard might actually ease the eventual transition to left tackle because you've already changed the muscle memory from the right side to the left side. But then you've also got Mike McGlinchey, who played left tackle at Notre Dame. Maybe I'm making this more confusing than it has to be, but I think that drafting Jedrick Wills to play guard would potentially give you Pro Bowl production from day one, and you basically take a strength along the interior of the defensive line and move that strength to the interior of the offensive line. This long explanation is because I know drafting a guy that will hopefully play guard at first is just not a sexy pick and not one that you give up an impact defensive tackle for. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the 49ers jump up and get the guy that they want if that is in fact a wide receiver, because to watch the top 3 guys go in the 4 picks leading up to them would be pretty devastating. At pick number 14, the Buccaneers are on the clock. The sexy new uniform Buccaneers. With their new quarterback, Tom Brady, I swear, 2020 continues to be just the strangest year of my life, and probably yours too for that matter. But anyways, Tom Brady is likely a shell of his former self, but he's surrounded by weapons and brings a mental side of the game that Jameis didn't seem to really value. This could work out, but not behind the current offensive line. It's funny, I actually got called a Jets fan by a couple people in the last mock draft because I let Andrew Thomas fall to the Jets, and I'm pretty sure that I'll get called a Bucs fan in the comments of this one. But Andrew Thomas has been falling down a lot of people's draft boards for whatever reason, and I think that this has got to be his floor. He would push Donovan Smith as the starting left tackle in Tampa Bay, forcing the veteran to move to the right side potentially. But this is another offensive line where they might need to just take the best player along the offensive line, find a spot for him, and fill around him, because Ali Marpet is probably the only safe guy along this Bucs offensive line. At pick number 15, the Broncos are on the clock, and they've actually done a really good job of filling their holes and needs and setting themselves up to take the best player available. The hope has to be that one of these wide receivers falls into their lap. I know I've talked a lot about their interest in Henry Ruggs, but the lack of interest in wide receivers in the free agent market led me to mocking wide receivers earlier than I have in previous mocks. So you could reach on a wide receiver if there's one that you really want to pair with Courtland Sutton. I wouldn't argue with Jalen Reagor or even Justin Jefferson right here, but they're not the best player available, so trading down would probably make the most sense here. Instead, I moved on to the next best player available at a position of need, and notice that the Broncos don't have a single cornerback under contract beyond 2 seasons, and CJ Henderson out of Florida offers a future to the position while squeezing out some decent seasons out of AJ Bouye and Bryce Callahan as the veterans of the secondary. At pick number 16, the Falcons are on the clock, and Dante Fowler was such a key move for them, and I think that this eliminates them targeting an edge rusher in the first round. They still need pieces for all over the defense, but the best player available at this point is easily defensive tackle Javon Kinlaw out of South Carolina. Kinlaw might even go before Derrick Brown, but who knows, because this is going to be such an unpredictable draft with the lack of pre-draft visits and workouts. But Kinlaw will provide the Falcons with potentially one of the most disruptive defensive lines in the league, while also keeping Grady Jarrett fresh. Tyler Davison was a nice pickup for them last year and will give them the depth they need, but he is definitely limited to more of a run stopping role and will never be a super dynamic player. But Kinlaw has a chance to be a pretty special defensive tackle. He actually reminds me of that guy Rashid Hageman that they drafted a long time ago. Hopefully he's got a lot more maturity than that guy had and actually develops into the potential that people saw leading up to the draft. At pick number 17, the Dallas Cowboys are on the clock, and I gotta say, seeing the notification pop up on my phone for the Cowboys signing of Aldon Smith literally made me chuckle. Now all they need is for Randy Gregory to be reinstated, and these two could form a pass rushing duo with some really high potential. DeMarcus Lawrence is still the alpha in that locker room, so Randy Gregory and Aldon Smith are low risk, high reward options for the Cowboys at edge rush. If either one can play in a majority of the games this season, I think they've got a chance to have a decent edge rush altogether, even without Robert Quinn or the guy that I've been mocking for a while here, Clavon Chason from LSU. In fact, if Gerald McCoy even plays as well as he did in 2019, the Cowboys' entire defensive front could be impressive. Signing HaHa Clinton-Dix allows the Cowboys to wait and see what safeties fall to them in the second round, leaving cornerback as the biggest need heading into the draft. So instead of Clavon Chason at edge rush in this one, just to mix things up, I looked over for his teammate, who I also really like, but was dealing with some injuries and maybe didn't have the best season last year, and that's Christian Fulton. The Cowboys were never going to be able to afford Byron Jones, but they haven't really gone all out in finding a replacement for him yet in free agency, and they've got a lot of free agents coming up here in the next couple seasons, so I don't know if they've got the luxury of waiting until the second round to tap into this cornerback depth. So yeah, sign me up for one of these corners, please. At pick number 18, the Dolphins are back on the clock, and they need offensive linemen, right? That's pretty clear, and they could reach on the next tier of offensive linemen here, but best player available and positional value kicks in, and I just can't let this guy slide anymore. I'm not sure why Clavon Chason has so many haters, but man, some of y'all are crazy.
You're crazy. I like you, but you're crazy.
This dude can flat out ball and fits into this dynamic defense that all the Bill Belichick disciples run. Chason's also going to interview so well with NFL GMs, and teams are going to have to rely on a lot more testimonials and interviews with former coaches this year to deal with the lack of interaction that the GMs will get with the actual players. As far as leadership goes, I can't think of a better option for the Dolphins than... At number 19, the Raiders are back on the clock. After getting Henry Ruggs III at number 12, I feel like the offense is pretty much set for the Raiders. They could look for a center guard type to replace Richie Incognito, but that probably doesn't need to be addressed with a first round pick. So shifting towards their defense, the signings at linebacker also doesn't mean that the Raiders are not 100% out on a linebacker here. In fact, I think Patrick Queen would be such a good fit in Rod Marinelli's defense, but Corey Littleton's contract is not like Nelson Aguilar's. He's expected to contribute as a starter. And the rest of the Raiders defensive front feels set too, so you've got to assume that the secondary is where they could focus in with this 19th pick. If we look back at the Raiders' first draft with Gruden and Mayock, in the first round they draft guys with a lot of name recognition, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it just felt like they kind of reached on them all, in my opinion. Those picks might still work out, jury's out on a couple, but I just remember after the first round last year feeling like it was Mel Kiper actually drafting for them and not Mayock. So this defensive back might not be the best option on the board, especially in the eyes of draft Twitter, but he's got that name recognition and similar in size to last year's second round pick Trayvon Mullen, and that's Alabama's Trayvon Diggs. I guess the name recognition here works in more ways than one, even though they spell it differently. I can already imagine some nickname for them getting started, like the Trayvon brothers, or probably something more clever than that, but this seems like a very safe option for the Raiders to fall back on at number 19. At number 20, the Jaguars are back on the clock. After treating themselves to a new toy for the offense, at number 9, the Jaguars can now turn their attention towards the defense also. I was initially looking at Patrick Queen for them here until I remembered the signing of former Browns linebacker Joe Schobert. It's fitting that I forgot about this move because being overlooked has been the case for Joe Schobert in his entire career, but he was a solid addition. He's only missed 3 games out of 64 in his 4 underrated years in the NFL, and should offer some stability and consistency next to Myles Jack, who seems like he's hurt every other week. So much Much like the Raiders, let's go ahead and now shift towards the secondary where they need a cornerback. But with 3 going in the last 5 picks, it's not wise to reach on a guy here. This is one of the best landing places for a safety, I think, to go early on, and I'm not buying the negativity on my guy Grant Delpit falling into the middle of the second as I've seen in some projections. There are some other small school safeties that will have their time to shine in this NFL draft, but I don't know why Grant Delpit or Xavier McKinney have to be knocked down to prop those guys up. Delpit would be the top cover guy in the Jaguars secondary from day one and will thrive as a Swiss Army knife kind of guy, much like his former LSU predecessor Tyrann Mathieu. Delpit could push Jared Wilson as the starter at free safety for the Jaguars as a rookie, pairing up really well with Rodney Harrison to give the Jaguars some long-term stability in the back end of the defense. At number 21, the Eagles are on the clock, and Eagles fans weren't happy about getting mocked the second best linebacker in my last mock draft, Patrick Queen. Something about the Eagles not valuing linebackers enough to draft them in the first. And don't get me wrong, I'm always asking for advice from you guys about tendencies that your team has in the draft because nobody knows your team as well as you do. And while I get the undervaluing philosophy when it comes to running backs, maybe wide receivers or safeties, but middle linebacker is a pretty key role in the defense, and the right guy can transform a defensive unit. I get that if you lack confidence in Patrick Queen because he's a guy that we only saw as a starter for 1 season, but I'll just never understand people that think an NFL front office won't pivot or evolve from their philosophies if the right prospect is there, especially a GM as progressive as Howie Roseman. All I'm saying is that if you have a chance to get a guy in the same mold as other former LSU linebackers like Deion Jones, Devin White, Quan Alexander, and you get him late in the first round, well, I would take him over a wide receiver that touches the ball 3 to 5 times a game. But I will say Justin Jefferson does make a lot of sense here too. I mean, he's just too perfect of a fit for Carson Wentz, and this would allow the Eagles to thank Alshon Jeffrey for his services in their Super Bowl run right before cutting ties with the quote-unquote anonymous source for good. Deshaun Jackson is actually a prime candidate for a bounce-back season also, and should bring the speed element that the Eagles have been lacking since, well, Deshaun Jackson. At pick number 22, the Vikings are on the clock. This pick is one of the latest in the mock that I feel relatively confident in based on where this player is projected and how crucial of a need it is for the Vikings with the lack of starting options available at cornerback. TCU corner Jeff Gladney could trade his shades of purple from the Horned Frogs to the Vikings in a really seamless transition. This guy is Trey Waynes with better ball skills and a slightly smaller package. I actually like some of the young guys on this Vikings depth chart, especially the Texas guys, but if they give you much in the way of meaningful snaps this year, then it's icing on the cake. But the Vikings need a blue chip, top level, potential starter from day one cornerback from this draft. And with multiple first round picks now, don't be surprised if they are one of the teams trying to move up ahead of that cornerback run in the mid to late teens. So these mocks are supposed to be a healthy blend of serious and fun, because if you guys aren't entertained, then what's the point? So sometimes I will present scenarios that are meant to be serious but in a joking manner, and I guess it's up to you whether or not you want to have a sense of humor for a minute over the course of a 30+ minute mock draft video. The situation I'm referring to in particular is from my previous mock draft where I had the Colts trading up in front of the Patriots because I wanted to block the dreaded Patriots from a potential franchise quarterback falling into their lap. I don't know about you guys, but I actually want to root for Jordan Love's success. And even without a first round pick, this wasn't a completely unrealistic scenario for the Colts, especially if the Vikings trade up and a team is trying to do a double trade down to stockpile draft picks for the future. But without trades, Jordan Love is likely going to be there for the taking when the Patriots are on the clock. I'm hoping another NFL team rescues us from this scenario playing out, because the thought of a decade of love puns coming from Patriots fans makes me want to go out and lick a doorknob. I actually really want Cam Newton to get his chance in New England. Maybe Belichick could even get Cam Newton to stop using that ridiculous font on InstaFace or whatever it is. I think that's the only way I could find myself rooting for the Patriots to have success in 2020. At number 24, we've got the Saints on the clock, and they don't have a starting linebacker under contract beyond 2020. And other than Alex Anzalone, they're all getting up there in age. There's 2 good linebacker prospects still on the board in Patrick McQueen and Kenneth Murray. And remember the LSU linebackers I mentioned earlier? If the Saints drafted Queen, it would mean all 4 of those guys were drafted by NFC South teams. I guess local SEC bias is real. But Patrick McQueen staying in Louisiana would be more than just a fan service. He is a great fit football-wise for an indoor 4-3 team where his athleticism could shine from sideline to sideline. At number 25, we've got the Vikings, and if it plays out like this, which, it probably won't, but if it does for the Vikings' sake, and they lock up a starter at cornerback with 22, and don't have to trade up, then they can take their turn to treat themselves with a weapon for Kirk Cousins. I've got them replacing Stephon Diggs with a different type of wide receiver, but one with a high ceiling nonetheless. Denzel Mims would give the Vikings more of a jump ball guy for Captain Kirk to throw it up to. The Vikings could place a higher priority on edge rush, and Yetur Gross-Matos would actually be a great fit here, but I'm hoping the initial plan is to let Anthony Barr rush the passer a little bit more now that they've moved on from Everson Griffin. But I went wide receiver because they've invested so much into Kirk Cousins already and really need him to succeed. Also, it's not like they're lacking an alpha edge rusher with Danielle Hunter, who, by the way, is only 25 years old. At number 26, we've got the Dolphins, who have given a lesson in patience and taking the best player available. It almost always leads to success, and because of that, the Dolphins are able to land their offensive lineman at the end of the first round. Houston's offensive tackle Josh Jones is one of the top options in the second tier of offensive linemen, and will likely be the best option available when they're on the clock for pick number 18. So unless they're in love with Jones or Lucas Niang, I think they can wait on addressing the offensive line until pick number 26. At number 27, the Seahawks are on the clock, and they're always an interesting team in the first round of the NFL draft. I'm not going to attempt to make the smart play here for them this time around because I feel like I've been doing that in all my mocks this year, even though we all know that's probably not what's going to happen. So instead of throwing Yetur Gross-Matos into this slot, I'm going to try and get into the minds of Pete Carroll and John Schneider and find the guy that they're going to trade down a pick or two for and select at the end of the first. The first step to drafting like these guys is to ignore the most glaring need, and we've already done that by passing on YGM. The next step is looking at guys that are projected in the second or third round. So turning towards a secondary need, pun intended, I'm looking for a guy that is rising up boards because it seems like there's always a safety that gets taken at the end of the first that surprises everyone. And this year that guy is small school safety Jeremy Chin from Southern Illinois. At 6'3", 220, he's been compared athletically to Isaiah Simmons, but he's not making the move to play off-ball linebacker in the NFL like Simmons, and will likely stay roaming the secondaries. Chin fits the Seahawks' mold for long defensive backs and could be their Cam Chancellor of the future. After setting up the first rough draft of this mock draft, I was searching on Twitter for rumors of pre-draft visits and looking for videos of Jeremy Chin when I saw the Southern Illinois official Twitter football account posted that Matt Miller had this exact scenario playing out. I've always been a fan of Matt Miller, so it doesn't surprise me that we had a similar thought process, but I felt obligated to address this because I didn't want it to seem like I was out here copying mock draft ideas or whatever. In fact, a lot of times I'll change an idea if I feel like I saw somebody else get to it first, but I spent so much time on this write-up for them that I didn't want to scrap it. So there you go, great minds think alike. At 28, we've got the Ravens, and Ravens fans didn't appreciate the Michigan center Cesar Ruiz that I quote-unquote reached for in my previous mock draft. I understand that it is hard to get excited about drafting a center in the first round, so I won't torture you with the same pick, even though I feel pretty good about Ruiz being a fit in Baltimore and a safe option to fall back on if they don't trade out of this spot. But in those complaints by Ravens fans, quite a few of you mentioned a desire for Oklahoma linebacker Kenneth Murray, so I looked closer at the linebacker situation in Baltimore, and I was kind of shocked that linebacker wasn't higher on my radar as a need for them because the situation is definitely bleak. I think after the tagging of Matt Judon, I was so focused on maximizing the potential for Lamar Jackson that I just completely overlooked other defensive needs. LJ Fort is okay, but he's not a guy you want as your 16-game starter at inside linebacker, and I'm actually shocked the Ravens haven't tried to throw a smokescreen at the need for linebacker with some cheap veteran free agents, but Kenneth Murray is easily the top choice on the Ravens draft board in this scenario. At 29, the Titans are on the clock, and for the Titans, I've narrowed down the positions that I think they should be targeting at the end of the first to offensive line, cornerback, and edge rush. All three have pretty high positional value, so they're set up for a best player approach or a possible trade down into the early second round. After losing Jack Conklin to the Browns in free agency, former swing tackle Dennis Kelly is now projected to be the starter at right tackle, which means that there's no longer much depth behind him. But with the quarantine cutting out a lot of the offseason workouts, it's not the time to be bringing in rookie offensive linemen and try to mesh with four other guys when you've already got a veteran group of 5 and you've got championship aspirations. As far as the need at cornerback goes, I've been trying to replace Malcolm Butler for a couple years because of that inflated contract of his, and the contract is actually set up to get out of after the upcoming 2020 season, where cutting him could free up over $12 million as a post-June 1st cut. But with the cornerback depth in this class, you don't want to fill a 2021 need in the first round of 2020, and you could just draft a couple of guys later in this draft to fill the depth chart with guys to groom for next year, or worst case scenario, target a corner in the first round next year. And it all comes down to positional value. Quarterback is number 1 on that chart, right? And then number 2 is to negate the quarterback's value of your opposition, and you do that with pass rush. I really like the Vic Beasley pickup, and the 1-year deal makes it a low risk, high reward kind of move, but an effective championship pass rush comes at you in waves, right? The speed that the Titans are going to have on the edge with Beasley and Harold Landry is insane, but Beasley hasn't started all 16 games since his rookie season, and technically only started 12 games in his 15.5 sack season in 2016. If the Seahawks are as goofy as Matt Miller and I think that they could be and pass on Yetur Gross-Matos, then sign me up for him on the Titans. I'd rather try to start YGM for 16 games and let Beasley come in as a situational pass rusher to preserve him for a playoff run anyways. At number 30, I've got the Packers, and they needed weapons going into this offseason. After signing Devin Funchess, they're all set for a Super Bowl run, right? Psych. I liked pairing Funchess with Andrew Luck, and it's a shame that the Colts lost out on both of them before the season last year even got rolling. But now Funchess has found a place to rebound with another number 12 in need of weapons. But Devin Funchess is too much of a slow possession guy for me to think that the Packers are done adding receivers. In fact, Funchess might need to move back to tight end by the end of his NFL career, especially if it doesn't work out playing with Aaron Rodgers. After all, he was second team all Big Ten as a tight end in 2013. I keep saying the Packers need to add another Randall Cobb type, and there's a few here to choose from. Laviska Shenault is probably the best choice for an instant impact, assuming that he's healthy and ready, but without the opportunity to bring him in for a medical check, I think he might fall a little bit in this draft. I'm leaning towards the vertical speed of Jalen Reagor. He doesn't have the size that you get with the rest of the Packers wide receivers, but I think that's a good thing, and he would easily be the fastest upon arrival. At 31, the 49ers are back on the clock, and honestly, this hasn't been a great mock draft scenario for the 49ers. The players that they need to fill holes just have not been there when they were on the clock. They likely acquired the 13th pick with the hopes of improving their wide receiving core, but the wide receivers have been getting snatched up right before them, so much so that I had to go into this lengthy, rambling explanation why taking a guard at 13 made more sense than reaching on a wide receiver, then only to have them miss out again at 31. It's more likely the 49ers will be movers and shakers in the first night of the draft at some point, and hopefully they can get their guy when it counts. With these 2 mock draft picks, I hope that I've provided you though with an opportunity to see some potential consolation prizes at both first round spots. For this one, I'm adding another much needed long cornerback to fit this defensive scheme in Clemson's AJ Terrell. Our last live experience of AJ Terrell was of him getting burned in a championship game. I hope that's not too triggering for you 49ers fans still grieving your Super Bowl loss, but I promise he is a much better cornerback than was on display against that historic LSU Tiger passing game, and should be at least better than Akello Weatherspoon. And at 32, we have the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs on the clock, and I had them locked into getting a cornerback here until bringing back Bashaud Breeland on a 1-year deal. Other than Fuller, the Kansas City gang is mostly back together again, and I don't think that they need to reach on one of the cornerbacks still available. I've wavered on every mock draft for the Chiefs pick at 32 and was coming around on the idea that this pick needs to be defense if not running back, but this guy caught my eye as a perfect fit, and he's not a defensive player at all. So if the Ravens don't want him, it could be just a gain for the Chiefs, and that's Cesar Ruiz, the center out of Michigan. He could push Austin Reiter for the starting gig at center from day one of a normal season. Like I mentioned earlier, it's probably best to limit changes along the offensive line if possible, and center is a pretty important spot for continuity. But the Chiefs also have a big need at left guard, and Ruiz could slide in there for a year and just see what you get out of Reiter in his second full year as the starter before that contract expires after the season. Austin Reiter wasn't terrible last year. Obviously they won the Super Bowl, but I'm not sure if you want to lock him up as your starter for the next few years. The Chiefs are currently slated to start last year's 7th round pick Nick Allegretti, who comes into his second season with 13 total snaps on offense under his belt. Drafting Ruiz would allow Allegretti to be the swing backup at guard in 2020 with the hope that he can get ready to take over at left guard in 2021, while Ruiz moves over to center and Austin Reiter gets the Mitch Morse treatment and has to move on in free agency. That's going to do it for the first round. Now I'm going to move on to the second round. Some of these picks I'm going to have lengthy descriptions for, while others I might just give you a quick synopsis if it seems obvious to me. But for the sake of time, I'm going to try and roll through these. At number 33, the Bengals are still starting Bobby Hart at right tackle, so Ezra Cleveland is a fast climber up draft boards and could either be your right tackle or provide a little bit of insurance on the left side if Jonah Williams not quite back to 100% next year. At 34, I've got a fun fact for you. The Colts have got over $47 million of their cap tied up in quarterbacks this year. So let's get those 2 quarterbacks some weapons to throw to. T. Higgins gives you a nice big target opposite of T.Y. Hilton, who's on the final year of his contract. And with Paris Campbell, you've got a really nice 1-2-3 at wide receiver. At pick number 35, I want to see Julian Okwara link up with his brother. And I think that since Matt Patricia wants to be like Bill, I could see him making this happen because it makes football sense. At 36, Dave Gettleman passed on the offensive line unicorn for a unicorn at linebacker in the first. So now he gets his mini Mekhi Becton and Georgia's Isaiah Wilson. At 37, I've got the Chargers getting their Russell Taylor Okung replacement and local USC product Austin Jackson. At 38, the Panthers still haven't fully decided on a defensive scheme and will be running, quote, multiple looks this year. AJ Epinesa is the perfect tweener for multiple looks and could be the brute strength to Brian Burns' speed rush in their even fronts, or he could even put on a few pounds and be the 5 technique in their odd fronts. At 39, the Dolphins make DeAndre Swift the first running back off the board because they just need more dynamic weapons than Jordan Howard to take some immediate pressure off of Fitzpatrick or Tua. At 40, the Texans still haven't replaced the pass rush after letting Clowney go in a trade, and Zach Bond out of Wisconsin is a really versatile linebacker that can do it all and would be an instant upgrade over Brendan Scarlett. At 41, the Browns let Demarius Randall walk in free agency and signed Andrew Sendejo and Carl Joseph to 1-year deals. You have to hope that Sheldrick Redwine takes another step in his second year and can steal one of those starting spots away, but this has got to be the floor for Xavier McKinney. The patient approach pays off for the Jaguars, and they're still able to land a really good cornerback at 42 in Jalen Johnson. Antoine Winfield Sr. played 9 years for the Vikings, so the Bears could add to the rivalry by taking Winfield Jr. at 43 to address their overall need at defensive back, whether it be corner, slot corner, or safety. This guy's got the skills to do it all. At 44, the Colts are back on the clock, and the addition of DeForest Buckner was also interesting for me from their perspective because I always thought that he was going to be a better fit in a 3-4 defense. So the Colts still don't really have a true one technique, and yet Buckner is the only defensive tackle signed beyond 2020. Oklahoma's Neville Gallimore could be the stout run stopper next to Buckner without having to give up anything with the interior pass rush from him. At 45, Tom Brady is going to need a more consistent running game in Tampa Bay if this is going to work out, and Jonathan Taylor would probably get the fumbles under control after getting ripped on the sidelines by Brady once or twice. At 46, if the Broncos miss out on Henry Ruggs III in the first round, KJ Hamler would be a solid option in the second round that still offers that game-breaking speed. The Falcons need another cornerback, and Damon Arnett is a safe, battle-tested guy who saw a lot of targets playing opposite of Jeffrey Okudah, but the Falcons should have plenty of options at this position available around pick number 47. At 48, the Jets could play this right and land an elite wide receiver and a starting left tackle in the first 2 rounds, but I think that only happens if they wait on the offensive lineman for a guy like TCU's Lucas Niang. At 48, we've got the Steelers, and Bud Dupree is back on the franchise tag, but he is one good season away from breaking the bank with somebody else in 2021. He's also only had one productive season, and much like the Titans, you need these pass rushers in waves, and Terrell Lewis is too perfect of a fit here to pass up. The Bears are back on here at 50, and their weapons at wide receiver are kind of at a crossroads. Allen Robinson's probably going to sign elsewhere after the season because, well, Trubisky, but Laviska Shenault could make an instant impact and possibly save this offense as a dynamic weapon that helps Trubisky or Foles get the ball out quicker and limit the reads necessary. Laviska Shenault actually reminds me a lot of Cordarrelle Patterson. It would be interesting to see them on the same field at the same time for a season. At 51, the Cowboys can't continue to ignore the safety position in the draft. I would have preferred Grant Delpit in the first, and then Bryce Hall or the Auburn kid in the second, but Ashton Davis is an interesting option in the second and would ironically ease the transition from Jeff Heath as the GOAT, but passing on Blacklock and Madubuike was really tough for me here. I'm just not ready to give up on Tristan Hill just yet. At 52, the Rams would be easy to mock all defensive players throughout this whole mock draft and just call it a day, right? But this is supposed to be a run-first team and a high-flying offense, right? And without Todd Gurley, they are going to need their investment in Darrell Henderson to pay off this year. So they could elect to reinforce the running game with what I think is the nastiest guard in this class. I only heard about him after the football season, but it didn't take long for me to become a fan. At 53, we've got the Eagles on the clock, and they're likely going to go wide receiver cornerback or cornerback wide receiver in these first 2 rounds. And wherever Noah Igbenanagi ends up, it is the duty of the fan base to come up with a nickname as soon as possible. At 54, the Bills have a need at cornerback, and the Josh Norman signing allows them to take patient approach here with Bryce Hall coming off of that leg injury, and could end up being a steal for them because he was considered a first-round talent coming into 2019. I passed on the Ravens' need for a new center or guard in the first, but at 55, I just can't put it on the back burner any longer, and LSU's Lloyd Cushenberry III has got one of the best names in the class. Cushenberry, I love it. He's got the athleticism for getting to the second level in the running game, which fits right in with the offensive philosophy in Baltimore. At 56, the Dolphins also get their starting center of the future, and it seems like this is where all the fun names are at in this draft class. Matt Hennessy is a smart zone blocking center that can grow with Tua Tagovailoa and DeAndre Swift in Miami. At pick number 57, the Rams defense is a mess, to be honest, and they do need to throw an upgrade or two on that side of the ball. They're not going to get a pass rusher that's worthy of the 57th pick, but maybe a better coverage linebacker like Malik Harrison will help them. I like Micah Kiser, wahoo wah, but he's limited athletically and is better equipped at stopping the run, while Malik Harrison still has that size to play inside upside in this 3-4 defense. I think these two linebackers would complement each other really well. At 58, Curtis Weaver would give the Vikings a possible day one starter at defensive end to replace Everson Griffin, and the Vikings are having one of the best drafts of this mock. Alright, at pick 59, the Seahawks have neglected using draft capital in the offensive line for long enough. I'm not sure what's going on with Tyler Biadasz and his hip surgery, but he's never been as athletic as Cushenberry. I just wanted to say that one more time, Cushenberry. But yeah, so I think that Biadasz will be fine once he heals up because he's always been more of a heady player than an athletic guy. But hip surgery before you even make it to the NFL is never a good sign. At pick number 60, I don't think that this needs to be addressed early in the draft, but if the Ravens can wait on a wide receiver and then still get a guy like Brandon Ayuk late in the second, then they've got to take him. Ayuk was a JUCO transfer and just continues to get better every single year he plays football and is an excellent deep threat, but he's got a little bit more size than Hollywood Brown. But it's that versatile ability to be a deep threat that would really make him dangerous in this play action offense. We're at pick 61, and I'm not even a Titans fan, but I'm annoyed by the way they just let Jarrell Casey out the door for a 7th round pick. If they get Jadeveon Clowney with the cap space that they added, then it could pay off, but a 7th round pick? Come on, man. I'm just really wondering why my team didn't offer a 6th round pick for that guy. Anyways, Ross Blacklock could step right in and offer a better starting option than Jack Crawford, and then Blacklock and Jeffrey Simmons would be a disruptive duo along the defensive interior for years to come. At 62, we've got the Packers, and they lost Blake Martinez to free agency, and their linebacking core was already kind of lacking. The Packers have a few prospects on the roster already that excel in coverage, but Jordan Brooks is a downhill attacking type that can help them in stopping the run, which they really struggled with in 2019. The Chiefs picking a running back at 63 feels almost too easy to predict that I'm sure that it won't even end up happening, but from a value standpoint, it seems like a much better option than reaching on a cornerback or linebacker that won't even be a starter in 2020, whereas a running back could make an instant impact. I like J.K. Dobbins or Cam Akers as a fit in this Chiefs offense, but the LSU guy, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he's a better pass blocker, which might lead to him getting the nod over those guys, especially if a team is looking for him to be an instant starter. At 64, I've got the Seahawks going back to the offensive line for the Fresh Prince of Auburn and now have some real building blocks for the rest of Russell Wilson's career. All right, moving on to the 3rd round. At 65, we've got the Bengals taking wide receiver Donovan Peoples-Jones. In my top 10 quarterback video, I criticized the Bengals supporting cast as why I wouldn't blame Joe Burrow if he wanted to pull on Eli Manning. And I got informed in the comments of all the outside weapons the Bengals have, like AJ Green, John Ross, Tyler Boyd, Joe Mixon, Gio Bernard. And on paper, I do like all of those guys. In fact, it's almost the perfect setup. But can you ever get all of them on the field at the same time? And if you do, can you get the offensive line to block consistently? There should be better times ahead for the Bengals, and that starts with Joe Burrow and Jonah Williams coming back, but AJ Green isn't in long-term plans, and I think that he's too nice to ask for a trade, but this is probably his final year with the Bengals. I think Donovan Peoples-Jones would be a fun pairing with Burrow, and these guys could develop a Tony Romo, Dez Bryant kind of backyard football connection. At 66, I've got the Redskins taking offensive tackle Matthew Pert from UConn. Trent Williams might get moved during the draft, if not during the downtime leading up to the season, and the Redskins are going to need to add a guy with left tackle potential. Pert has the size and athleticism that you look for and gives you a guy that you can develop into a starter. At 67, got the Lions selecting defensive tackle out of Texas A&M, Justin Madubuike. The Lions have absolutely wasted or discarded some of the best defensive tackle talent over the last decade, but hopefully Justin Madubuike can buck that trend as more of a dynamic nose tackle than Danny Shelton. Pick number 68, the Jets are slated to start Jordan Jenkins at edge, which is fine. He's gotten better every year. But on the other side, there's a few journeymen competing for this job that Ja'Kai Polite threw in the trash last year. Michigan's Josh Uche is the anti-Ja'Kai Polite and would give the Jets 2 steady edge rushers. Pick number 69, Dante Jackson is the only cornerback on the Panthers roster that they've got under contract beyond the 2020 season, and this has been a position of need for them for a while. Cameron Dantzler might not be as fast as his social media pro day, but he's been one of the best cornerbacks in the SEC with great size to grow into a #1 cornerback that can compete with the big wide receivers in the NFC South. This will also allow the rest of the depth chart to slide into more appropriate roles because Dante Jackson is a better #2, and I always liked Corn Elder, but he's definitely better in the slot. At pick number 70, I've got the Dolphins taking safety Kyle Duggar. It's so hard to project some of these Division II small school guys as an average Joe, but Kyle Duggar looked like a monster against Senior Bowl competition, and he's clearly an athlete. He's going to be moved around the field, but should find a home as an in-the-box strong safety and nickel linebacker. Eric Rowe is currently penciled in as the strong safety starter right now, but he's a converted cornerback, so after moving on from Rashad Jones, the Dolphins really don't have a player like this on their roster. At pick number 71, 71, the Chargers moving on from Melvin Gordon was a bold move, but Austin Eckler sure made it a lot easier on them. But that leaves Eckler and Justin Jackson as the only running backs on the Chargers roster right now, and that's a good sign that they are going to be drafting at least one running back, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who is another guy in need of a nickname by the way, but he would be a nice thumper to add to this running back committee. We got the Cardinals at pick number 72, and they might be an all-out offensive team this year, so the defense could always struggle to be keeping up, but a good counter to that is to have at least a decent pass rush, so the Cardinals need to continue to add prospects to get after opposing quarterbacks. Tennessee's Darrell Taylor is a good athlete and could be groomed to eventually take over for Chandler Jones. Pick number 73, the Jaguars defensive line is unrecognizable compared to their AFC Championship squad from a few years ago. They tried to get ahead of this purge at the defensive tackle position a few years ago by selecting Taven Bryan in the first round, and who knows, maybe he'll thrive with an increase in reps, but you gotta get another young guy in there to push him with the hopes that maybe he's even better than Bryan. Marlon Davidson is a really interesting prospect that could play anywhere along the defensive line, but his size screams pass rushing defensive tackle or 3-tech. At 74, the Browns still need offensive line help and can stay in state with Jonah Jackson from Ohio State, who would eventually slide in at right guard, assuming you go offensive tackle in the first, and this would give the Browns a pretty solid starting unit along the offensive line moving forward. At 75, the Colts and Phillip Rivers both love their tight ends. Jack Doyle is a pretty good player, and Mo Alley-Cox is an intriguing prospect that should get a chance for an increased role this year, but I expect a tight end to get drafted at some point, and Cole Kmet just feels like a mediocre blend of Doyle and Eric Ebron that the Colts would probably covet. At pick number 76, got the Buccaneers, and they let Jameis Winston walk for a 42-year-old. I know that it's Tom Brady, but it's a 42-year-old Tom Brady, so they've got to cover themselves in case Brady looks like a 42-year-old at some point this season, while also providing themselves a new future at the position. Jacob Eason is definitely a Bruce Arians kind of quarterback and would be a solid option to take over in 2021, and is great value at pick number 76. At 77, the Broncos need inside linebackers suited for the 3-4. Vic Fangio loves his big downhill linebackers, and Willie Gay would likely have been drafted higher than this had he not cheated on a chemistry test, which led to an 8-game suspension this past year. Instead of coming back to school and redeeming himself, he said, "F it, I'm out of here," declared for the NFL. Moving on to pick 79, after finally cutting ties with the overpriced Tremaine Johnson, the Jets need cornerbacks. Again, Troy Pride Jr. doesn't do anything that jumps off the screen at you, but he's just a solid all-around cornerback. Decent size, speed, and athleticism. He tackles well enough, and he can play man or zone without being a liability. The Jets just really need some consistency like this. At pick number 80, the Raiders dealt with a lot of injuries along the offensive line last year, but I can't figure out what's more unbelievable. The fact that Richie Incognito is still back in the league, or that he actually played well enough to be invited back for some more. He is 36 though, he's one of the ones that struggle with the injuries, and I don't trust the guy to not go all Chris Benoit at some point, so the Raiders better get that replacement sooner than later. Robert Hunt from Louisiana is a massive human being who would actually bully Incognito for a change. Back-to-back picks is really nice, but I'm sure that if one of them gets sacrificed in a trade-up, it will be this one, pick number 81, so I'm splurging on Jalen Hurts here as a developmental quarterback for John Gruden. He could be the real reason for the Mariota signing, kind of like how the Ravens signed RG3 right before drafting Lamar Jackson. At 82, we've got the Cowboys on the clock, and I got a lot to say about this one, so bear with me. After my top 10 wide receivers video left Chase Cole out of the top 10, I felt like I needed to clarify to the waves of people telling me that I'm sleeping on him. First of all, I'm all about trying to find the literal next big thing at wide receiver. It's one of my favorite things to do. Last year, I was all aboard Team DK Metcalf. I even made a scouting report hyping him up as a top 10 pick. Secondly, please go back and watch Chase Claypool and tell me honestly if you see him do freakish things on the football field. I didn't. You can even save some time and just watch his highlights. They're kind of boring, and he's just making routine catches in a body that happens to be 6'4", 240. Notre Dame in fact just put out a guy like that last year, Miles Boykin, with similar measurables. He was also drafted in the 3rd round. And lastly, I posted that video the day before the NFL Combine, so I didn't expect him to put up Megatron numbers. I knew he'd be big and fast, but I wasn't quite expecting that, so I might have given him a little bit more of a shout out had I known. I'm not hating on the guy, and I'm trying to make that clear by mocking him to my favorite team, the Cowboys, not just to prove a point, but because it makes sense. I just think that he's a bigger and thicker DK or Miles Boykin and would be better suited to move to tight end, where he could be an insanely dynamic player like Darren Waller has become with the Raiders. Don't forget, Darren Waller also put up insane combine numbers too. But back to Claypool's fit with the Cowboys. They need a slot wide receiver receiver, and the big slot wide receiver seems to be the move these days. Cowboys also need another pass-catching tight end, and Claypool could be one of those or both, but I don't think that he's consistent enough of a catcher or shifty enough as an athlete to be a full-time wide receiver on the boundary. At pick number 83, the Broncos can't rely on Garrett Bowles anymore, so I've got them taking a shot on a small school offensive tackle, Ben Barch. He's not a day one starter, but you can get him ready to take over one of these offensive tackle spots within the next season or two. At pick number 84, we've got the Rams. Like I said, it wouldn't shock me if they continue to neglect the defense and shore up the offense and make sure that they're at least able to score some points. Dumping Brandon Cooks was definitely a smart move because he's just never going to shake these concussions that haunt him every week. Local guy Michael Pittman is not going to fill Cooks' role because they can be more of a contrast at wide receiver, but the future at wide receiver looks really grim for the Rams unless they can find a future starter or two in this deep draft class. At 85, the Lions also have a lot of change coming at the wide receiver position in the next 2 seasons. Luckily for them, this draft is full of wide receivers, and Bryan Edwards actually reminds me a little bit of Kenny Golladay. I assume that there's no way they let Kenny Golladay out the door, but Marvin Jones' time is probably coming to an end, and having 2 Kenny Galladays on the outside wouldn't be such a bad thing. At 86, the Bills need another pass rusher, and if there's a ideal landing spot for blue-collar Kenny Willekes, it's got to be Buffalo. At pick number 87, Gronk's number, they find his replacement in Bryson Hopkins. At pick number 88, I've got the Saints drafting a wide receiver even though they signed Emmanuel Sanders. The knock on Van Jefferson is his age, that he's 24. I think he's the best wide receiver left on the board at this point, and the Saints are not going to be worried about his age because they are in win right now mode. At 89, the Vikings have undergone quite a change along the interior of their defensive line, and Raekwon Davis will be a nice fit next to nose tackle Michael Pierce, and hopefully Mike Zimmer can really unlock this guy's potential. At pick number 90, I've got the Texans taking nose tackle Davon Hamilton. This defense used to be one of the stronger points of this Texans team, but it feels like the talent's kind of evaporating. Hamilton could probably come in and supplant Eddie Vanderdoes from day one. At pick 91, I've got the Raiders getting a small school linebacker, Akeem Davis-Gaither out of Appalachian State. This guy is a super athlete and definitely a coverage guy who would serve as an insurance policy for their 2 new free agent signings. At 92, I've got the Ravens selecting edge rusher out of Alabama, Anthony Jennings. Matthew Judon got the franchise tag, but the Ravens like to have a lot of developmental guys at positions like this, and they've got to hope that either Jalen Ferguson or Tyus Bowser continues to develop and can slide into a starting role. If not, at least Jennings has got some experience in Alabama playing at a high level and offers you at least a high floor of potential. At 93, I've got the Titans taking Kansas offensive lineman Hakeem Adeniji. Probably butchered that, but I mentioned that they have a needed offensive tackle. This guy is got a lot of tackle and guard flex and would be nice to have as a swing backup tackle and hopefully develop into a starter down the line. At pick 94, I've got the Packers selecting Missouri tight end Albert Okwuegbunam, or Albert O. I remember thinking that Albert O was a really solid prospect, and I thought he was going to be a 1st or 2nd round pick last year when he was playing with Drew Lock. And then after Drew Lock left, his production really hit a wall at Missouri, and people were wondering why I didn't even mention Kelly Bryant in my top 10 quarterbacks video. But then when this guy came out and ran a ridiculous 40 that didn't even make sense based on the type of player that he was, I mean, this guy's got to get drafted in the top 3 rounds, right? I love pairing him back up with a legitimate quarterback and seeing if him and Jay Sternberger can offer a nice dynamic duo at tight end for the Packers. At pick number 95, giving the Broncos a little bit of insurance in case Simmons is not able to reach a long-term deal on a contract with Texas safety Brandon Jones. At 96, the Chiefs finally get their backup cornerback in Darnay Holmes from UCLA. At 97, the Browns also dip into the cornerback pool with Amik Robertson from Louisiana Tech. This is a good slot cornerback that can play inside while Denzel Ward and Greedy Williams man the outside. And at pick 98, you know Belichick loves versatility, and this Auburn defensive line is full of it. Nick Coe measured in at 6'5", 280 at the NFL Combine, but I think he played closer to 300 pounds and lost weight to run that 4'9", 40. Nick Coe is a classic tweener who peaked in 2018, but then struggled to get reps in 2019 in this loaded defensive line. At 99, the Giants don't necessarily need a wide receiver, but they still haven't had a guy rise to the top to be the number 1 guy, so they're going to have to go wide receiver by committee here. And KJ Hill comes from the wide receiver factory of Ohio State. At pick number 100, the Patriots are back on again, and they've lost a lot of production at the linebacker position. Logan Wilson out of Wyoming is an old school Belichick kind of guy, and I fully expect him to end up being a Patriot at some point in this draft. At pick number 101, we've got the Seahawks, and this defensive edge class falls off a cliff quickly, so the Seahawks can't wait much longer than this. Jonathan Greenard is not a crazy athlete, but he came into Florida as a transfer and had 9.5 sacks in 2019 and only 12 starts. So the production is there, even though the measurables and traits might not be. At pick 102, I've got the Steelers taking Jake Fromm, and this would be an ideal scenario for Fromm. There would be no pressure for him to start or even be the primary backup in 2020, but the team is set up to be a defensive juggernaut for the next few years, so he could be the leader and bus driver that they would need if called upon. At pick 103, I've got the Eagles selecting Wake Forest linebacker Justin Sternad. The Eagles need to add a linebacker at some point, and Sternad is really good value at this point. He's coming off of a bicep surgery, which cut his senior season short, but the size and the production was all there before. But the Eagles have been burned by taking health risks or guys coming off of injuries recently, so they may avoid a guy like this, even though I think the fit is perfect. At pick number 104, the Rams continue to build up their offense with the uber athletic national champion LSU offensive tackle Sadiq Charles. He's a little small and would naturally struggle as a rookie against a guy like Nick Bosa within the division, but will excel when pulling on running plays. This is a guy that I think you could potentially play almost anywhere along the offensive line, especially once he gets an offseason in an NFL weight room, but this is definitely a pick for the future. At 105, the Vikings will be drafting for depth pretty early on in this, and with Anthony Harris on the franchise tag and Harrison Smith just turned 31 years old, safety is a good position to address early for them. Utah safety Terrell Burgess is a sleeper and fits a Zimmer mold. And at 106, I've got the Ravens, and they are not afraid to double dip at a position, and they should consider this approach at edge rush this year. This front office or scouting department are just so good at their job that they might actually be the ones to take a shot on this gem from Charlotte, Alex Highsmith. That's it for the third round, and I'm going to show you the fourth round of this mock draft without commentary on the picks. First off, I hope everyone is doing okay with this social distancing stuff and that you and your family and friends are healthy and as happy as possible given the circumstances. I know that even in the best of situations right now, this stuff is probably starting to wear on you at this point, but you're not alone. Even though it feels like that, I want to recommend that you use the technology available to you to dive deep into something in your spare time. You can schedule a video chat with friends or start that YouTube channel of your own that you've been thinking about for months. Or, this one might sound crazy, but you can even read a book. No, but seriously, Game of Thrones is an awesome book series, and the first few seasons of the show are really fun to watch after you read the first couple of books. Or, you can just watch all of my old mock drafts until you fall asleep. And the draft will be here before you know it. It kind of feels like a light at the end of this tunnel, but sadly, I feel like it's really only the midway point, and then we're really going to be in for it during May. I'm going to be doing some unique videos during that time and try to practice some new techniques and ideas, kind of like the Chiefs video I did after the Super Bowl. Also, I would love to practice with an upgraded program and maybe jumpstart some more live streams here and get something where we can be a little bit more interactive on a regular basis. So I'll make a deal with you. If we can hit the goal of 4,000 likes on this video before the draft, I will do a live stream on the night before the first round of the NFL draft, which is April 22nd, probably somewhere around 9:30 p.m. Eastern time. Gotta wait for the kids to go to bed, and break down the picks in this fourth round as well as rounds 5 through 7. I've always wanted to do a 7th round mock draft, and I tried last year in a live stream. I think we barely made it to the 3rd round. We were so busy talking about other things and other prospects and different possibilities and stuff in the first round. But with a 3-round head start, I think that will leave plenty of time to break down round 4 and have you guys help me make the picks for the rest of the mock. At the end, I'll do some Q&A with everybody. I'd love to see who you guys have on your radar in the late rounds. And one more thing about that top 10 quarterbacks video and just the top 10 positional series in general. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to continue doing those videos just because they take so much time. And on top of all that, the quarterback one got 9 copyright claims on it. 9. They copyright hit me 9 times. That's right. Even though what I'm doing is in fact fair use, it falls under an educational purpose, but that's just the world that we live in today. And I don't really want to reduce those top 10 videos to just being a slideshow, the player picture. I like to be able to show you what I'm talking about and to some degree. But I'm working on seeing if I can clear those 9 copyright claims. And if I can, I may have time to do one more, maybe for the running back, but fingers crossed that works out. But that's all I've got for this one, guys. Thanks as always for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. Stay safe out there, wash your hands, don't touch your face, and I will see you all in the next video.
Gary! I was just looking for the sports channel, Gary.